Hi everyone. If you haven't seen the news already, it's highly likely that Lewis Hamilton is going to be awarded a Knighthood in the Queen's New Year's Honours List. However, there are mixed views about it. A recent YouGov poll showed that 21% of the British public think he does deserve one, and it begs the question, does Lewis Hamilton deserve a Knighthood? And today I'm going to be delving into the reasons for and against and give you my views on things. So, if you don't know what a Knighthood is, don't worry. It's basically a British system of titles and awards that are given twice a year for the Queen's birthday and for New Year's. They're decided by the Cabinet, which is basically a political body of ministers in the UK that run the country, and they can be awarded for recognition of any achievements, and they go from being a member of the most excellent order of the British Empire all the way through to being a knight or a dame, hence the titles. So, Lewis Hamilton is statistically the best British driver of all time. He's just achieved his 7th world title, and probably by the time he retires, he will be the greatest F1 driver of all time. And whether people think that's disputed or not, the facts speak for themselves. If you look at the statistics, Lewis Hamilton, unless he has an absolute mare next year, will be an 8th-time world champion. Some people think that Lewis Hamilton hasn't achieved enough to deserve to have a knighthood. He's had 94 wins, 163 podiums and 97 pole positions. He's achieved 7 world championships. He is statistically the best British driver of all time, and it's highly likely, unless he has an absolute mare in the next couple of seasons, he will be the best F1 driver statistically of all time. No one can doubt that. And to be honest, those who say that Lewis Hamilton doesn't deserve it, if you look at those that have had knighthoods for other things, they are the pinnacles of the sport. Look at Mo Farah, look at Jess Irons with the damehood. Look at Andy Murray. They were the pinnacles, or the British pinnacles of the sport. Lewis Hamilton has rewritten the history books forever in motorsport. He has defined himself in a generation. Michael Schumacher, Ayrton Senna, legends of the sport. Niki Lauda, people that people idolise because of their talent. And Lewis Hamilton seems to encapsulate all of their talents and more. He's not just fast. He's incredibly smart, incredibly tactical, incredibly kind of bonded to his car, and it allows him to understand it better. And even when it's not going great, look at Turkey last time out. That Mercedes car was not the best, but Lewis Hamilton knew the right calls to make, understood his style and his car. And ultimately, you can't fault him when they say, oh, Formula One, it's all about the Mercedes is the only reason he's won these titles. They're going to be a contributing factor. But so are the personal trainers of other athletes. So, for example, in sailing, could argue the boat. There's so many arguments that say, oh, Lewis Hamilton shouldn't deserve it because he's only achieved things because of the car. Mercedes will always be a contributing factor. They are an incredible team. And if Lewis Hamilton gets awarded a knighthood, it also says a lot about them as it does about him. However, look at Valtteri Bottas. Valtteri Bottas wouldn't have achieved those things. Truthfully, I could think of very few drivers that would achieve all that Lewis Hamilton has. And his 7 world titles are because of him, and ultimately him alone, because it's him that drives the car, that's able to maximise the potential out of it. And in the end, for those who say hasn't achieved enough to deserve one, I feel like they need to go and take a look at the history books, because Lewis Hamilton's name is going to be written all over them. So the second argument people have is that motorsports isn't really given knighthoods at all. If you look at the history books, there have been 8 motorsport knighthoods given, including to Sir Jackie Stewart, Sir Jack Brabham, and to Sir Stirling Moss. And for a lot of them, they weren't given at the time they won the championships. Stirling Moss's came in 2000, years, decades after he'd retired from the sport, but it was a recognition of all he'd achieved at the time. Why can't Lewis be the 9th? Is he has achieved a lot. He's a peak physical athlete. And also, if anyone says that motorsport's an easy sport, I'll say this, it's one of those sports that you put your life on the line for. Running and things like that, and athletics, there's a certain level of safety that comes with it unless there's a freak accident. Motorsport, we all know, we've all seen what's happened in the past couple of years, is every time those F1 drivers step in the car, they put their lives on the line. They leave everything out on track, and no matter what happens, they'll carry on racing for the good of the sport. And you can't fault someone for not doing a sport that you don't think is worth it because of your values. In the end, F1 drivers deserve knighthoods just as much as any other athlete does. And are you saying, okay, the award system shouldn't recognise all athletes? Because if you don't recognise what achievements have won, then why are you allowed to recognise the achievements of others? It just doesn't make sense to deny someone a knighthood because you don't think motorsport is a proper sport. The last argument people have is that knighthoods aren't just awarded for a single sporting achievement. For example, if you look at Sir Stirling Moss, he had a multitude of motorsport successes, including at Le Mans. Sir Jack Brabham got knighted 13 years after winning his final title, and Jackie Stewart got his 26 years later because he worked tirelessly to promote safety in motorsport and ultimately for something that all the current drivers are in his debt for. And they argue that Lewis Hamilton doesn't deserve it because all he has done is win in Formula One, he's never won anywhere else, and he's never done anything else. And that's where I think this year is the most significant. Because that one argument that Lewis has done nothing else but racing cars or have a glamorous lifestyle has been proved wrong by his actions this year. He probably has one of those divisive reputations amongst the public. In the 2017 Paradise Papers, it was found that he'd avoided £3.27 million of tax when he purchased a private jet. And a lot of people felt that, he was avoiding the tax system, he's avoiding the Brit. He doesn't want to pay taxes in Britain, he lives in Monaco or lives in Colorado. However, it has been proved he does pay his taxes in the UK. He pays his taxes depending on where he earns it, which is what everyone does. In the end, Lewis Hamilton is just doing the tax system as he's been told to, as is the correct way to do it. In the end, if he earns stuff in another country, it's their money, not ours. And just because you don't like the British tax system isn't a justifiable reason to say he doesn't deserve a knighthood or that he's trying to con us. But when everyone says it's Lewis Hamilton has done nothing else but race, I ask you to take a look back at this year because Lewis Hamilton has come into his own not just as a racer, but as an activist. If it wasn't for Lewis Hamilton, Formula One would not even be attempting to make any proper moves towards diversity because there'd be no vote. There's not very much vocalism but Lewis. Lewis Hamilton's worked tirelessly for change as one of the few working class, the only black driver on the grid. He stands out in a way because of F1's lack of diversity, and he's been actively seeking to change that. He's tried to tackle environmental issues, such as becoming vegan, for example, trying to offset his carbon emissions, the fact that he's going to be running a team in Extreme E to highlight the environmental impacts the racing have and our kind of global responsibility to do better for the environment. He set up the Hamilton Commission with the Royal Academy of Engineering to get BAME students into STEM subjects and hopefully get them into motorsport. He has been an active campaigner on the Black Lives Matter movement. He's stood up against racism, even when the FIA and F1 have kind of judged him for it, when they've told him that you can't wear these political statements and things like that. And Lewis Hamilton said no. Some things, and I commend him for it, sticking to his principles and sticking by them. And F1 would not be trying anything if it wasn't for him being so vocal. Lewis Hamilton's not afraid to call a spade, to call things out where he sees it. And he's very much part of this new era, I think, of sporting stars in general. Look at Marcus Rashford, for example. Previously, sport and politics were two very separate things. You did not discuss them together. And now sports stars are coming out, and Lewis Hamilton has been a leader, to be honest, from the moment he arrived at the paddock. We've all seen the pictures of back in 2007, 2008, when people wore blackface to races and things like that. And Lewis Hamilton has dealt with so much prejudice, so much discrimination, and the fact that he's not been able to go out and prove it on track, but he's actually thought, you know what, I'm going to use my public profile to make things better. So, in review, there are some arguments of why Lewis doesn't deserve a knighthood. For me, it's a simple case of Lewis Hamilton is the greatest F1 driver we will ever see in our lifetimes. He is also a tireless activist and campaigner. He's a role model for generations. One day when we see more diverse representation in the Formula One paddock, we're going to look back and it'll be because of Lewis Hamilton that that's there. The fact that he brought Mercedes on board and has been able to make this change is a testament to the content of his character. And in the end, I could think of no more perfect person to deserve a knighthood and recognition for all he's achieved both on track and off track. So that's all for me. Let me know in the comments below, do you think Lewis Hamilton deserves a knighthood? Make sure to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Au revoir, bye!